You're on 121.5, the emergency frequency.
RPMs, they up, baby. Everything humming. Sunset. We out here. Off them brakes. Let it do what it do. Right rudder. You know how it is out here, man. Boom. Look at that thing. She rolling. She rolling. She rolling. Her rotation speed is fine. Pull that thing back. Let it do what it do, baby. We up, baby. Best angle of climb.
Ladies and gentlemen, a big announcement. It has finally happened. Max has become a fan of pilot memes.
Very pointed ones.
Pilot social media, as we've talked about before, the gift that keeps on giving.
Just a real content farm.
Mm-hmm. The good and the bad. Let's talk about the bad first.
Yeah, we'll be brief. But if you guys heard from our last episode, Jeff Kersey over at PJP, after that truckie crash, called the pilots murderers and losers and destroyers, and I think jumped to a lot of conclusions we talked about in the last episode. And, you know, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because that behavior's, like we discussed, unacceptable, and we don't want to give the guy more attention. But it is kind of funny how things come around. So people have come up with all these hilarious memes, and he has some stuff in his past. People, you know, whatever. But basically, I mean, where do you start here?
Yeah, I think you said it in the last episode. Don't throw stones when you live in a glass house. And if you post a lot of stuff on social media, you kind of live in a glass house.
Well,
you know?
there's when you say things that are viewed by a lot of people or listened to in our case, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, there's responsibility, I suppose, but there's also exposure. The great thing about this country is anybody can say whatever they want, which is awesome, and I encourage that. But you do also have to be braced for the backlash that might come as you say some controversial stuff. So anyway, our boy Jeff took off and did a real quick return to the airport, and then the rumor was that he may have left the gear pins in. And so he came back, and Dylan and I were like, oh man, if this is confirmed, this is going to be just, you know, even more
the internet will explode,
and it's going to go nuts. So he responded and said, you know, somebody put 2 of his gear pins in and this and that. And there's people hoping it's for his demise, and that, you know, keep him in their prayers this weekend. The enemy is after us all. And wrote this post, and you're just like, what? So, you know, the thing, I tell this to my 6-year-old son and all my kids. Everybody makes mistakes.
Yeah.
Right. It's a lot of times, though, you're judged about what happens right after you made that mistake.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, I've taken off with the gear pins before, and I remember I landed and it was embarrassing.
Yeah.
And in my case, the line guys had put them in because they moved and we went to lunch and this and that.
Yeah.
It's just a weird situation. But at the end of the day, it's my fault. Like, I climbed up the stairs and the flags were hanging down out of the gear wells. You know, at the end, that's it. And I went back to the boss, you know, said, hey, I screwed up. I'm not perfect either. And this is what happened. Now I'm going to hang my head and go back to the cockpit and fly us home. Yeah. But then he blames everybody else and the whole charade. And it's like, dude. And so then the memes just started flowing.
The so gear. Funny. If you've been on social media in the last couple of days and you've been seeing a lot of pictures of gear pins, then that's why. So my favorite was this picture of these guys holding these gear pins, and it says, "Not today, Satan." And, I don't know. Look, like we said, there's those that have and there's those that will. When it comes to gear pins, are like me trying to taxi out with the linkage, you know, not connected on the beach jet, which is a classic move with the pin out, you know. And like you said, it's how do you respond after you make a mistake? Because you will.
Let me just give him a hint. Blaming everybody else, including the enemy and the devil, is probably not the best path. You know, we'll leave it on this, Don. In the words of one of my favorite rappers, Ice Cube, sometimes you need to chickadee check yourself before you riggedy wreck yourself.
That's true.
That pretty much sums it up, right?
It's true. And hey, you know what? And even though, like we talked about, like even this situation, it's funny and people are making all these pictures, but guess what? Guess what the one cool thing about this is? People are probably going to be paying a lot more attention to their gear pins for the next couple weeks. You know what I mean?
I'm sure. Or hopefully to what they post immediately after an accident happens.
And like on a serious note, what if this happened and it caused one operator to think, you know what, we don't have a great way of verifying the gear pins, you know, between the whole crew. Maybe one guy just does it and he puts it away, and maybe somebody is a little lax in that area, and maybe this brings awareness to it, and we can improve on safety in our industry. Which was what the whole thing we were talking about.
The best thing about all of this information that can fly around so fast is that we can all hopefully learn from it. Yeah. And we took off with the gear pins, and it was super embarrassing and whatever. And guess what? Went right to the checklist before start. You know, we visually checked 3 gear pins. And then, you know, what's funny about that actually? When I went to Southwest and you do the checklist there, the first thing, or one of the very first couple items, is gear pins 3 aboard.
Yep, that's same at the airline I was at. Yeah, we did the same thing. And you know, I've talked to guys that have like a clear plastic like makeup bag or something they keep in the cockpit. They actually keep the pins in the cockpit. You know, in the Challenger, we keep them they have this special like compartment in the door. I think I'm actually going to change that.
That's how the Gulfstream is too. Before we would put them in the door, we would always show them to the other guy.
That's what we always do, show them that. But I kind of almost want them in the cockpit instead.
That's nice when they put that little holder in there.
I know.
Remember the Embraer has that and the 730 has that, so you can see them. That's the whole point. They're there so you can turn around and just see them.
That's why I want them in a clear plastic.
They make
pouch.
something else too that like hooked onto the thrust levers that had places for the gear pins on the Gulfstreams. Yeah,
I think there's. I don't know. So anyways, listen. Things happen. It's how you respond afterwards, and hopefully, all our safety will improve because of this. Okay, onto the good of what we heard.
So much.
So if you heard that kind of weird intro we played in the episode today, that was from our boy Donovan Batiste, who is like a motivational speaker on Instagram. You might have seen this video, but these videos were posted of him flying.
I would actually be shocked if you haven't seen this video. And you're a pilot.
Here,
somebody had to.
You might have heard this.
That mixture, you know it's rich. Elon Musk. Hey, them flaps, they ain't 20s, they 10s, but we keep them clean, though.
What does that even mean?
Line that thing up on the runway, baby. Full throttle like you're in that Hellcat. Look at that nose wheel, it's already off the ground. Hold that sight picture. Hold that thing. Let them instruments do what they do. They in the green, baby. Foliage. You know what I'm talking about? Foliage. One time for your mind. Rotation P. That thing thinging. Let it slide up off the ground. We in ground effect, baby. We in ground effect. Just riding that thing. Soft feel, baby. Soft feel. We in that thing. We in that thing. Woo!
I remember the first time I did a soft field takeoff too. After we took off, after this video just came out with my other pilot and stuff, we blast off, and I'm like, let it do what it do with the whole way. I mean, that's all we can.
Ground effect.
That's when we landed in the front. We in ground effect, baby.
But see, and now we have all these great drops. You just push a button and it goes.
Off them brakes. Let it do what it do. Right rudder. You know how it is out here, man.
And there's some other ones. Some of the new ones that we just discovered is if you go on his page,
we'll have a link.
Just playing hardcore rap while flying. He's airborne, just cruising, and just
it's incredible.
It reminds me of Ted and his Ted videos.
I think Ted would be really into this.
Yeah, me too. I think this might.
So
we have to call him.
If anyone knows Mr. Donovan Batiste, let him know that we're extremely interested in talking to him and getting a call out to system.
Enthusiasm.
Yeah, it's just awesome.
Mind numbing. It's awesome.
We'll have a link to his profile in the show notes, so you can check that out. So we're good with social media. You got anything else you need to cover now that you're a big meme guy?
No, I'm good.
You're good. Okay. All right. Good show for us today. Jason Herman will be calling in, and he's going to give us an update on the pilot records database, the new rule that came out. And we're going to go through it and say, hey, if you're a pilot, what do you need to do? If you're an operator, what do you need to do? If you got more than 3 airplanes, what do you need to do? So we'll break it all down for you instead of reading the rate.
That rule affects, I'd say, almost everybody in one way or another.
In one way or another. And then after that, our friend Dave Keys is going to join us, and we're going to talk one of the potentially, we don't know, but one of the potential causes of this crash that we were talking about, and just in general, a weakness that we're seeing out there with professional pilots, and that's flying a visual approach.
Yeah.
So-
Dave makes a really good point. We had
Yeah.
a good talk about that.
And yeah, so we got a lot to cover today and a full mailbag. But before that, the listeners have been responding. When our call for reviews, we have gotten like maybe 10 reviews in the last few weeks. It's been awesome.
When it rains, it pours.
That's
It's
right.
funny. I remember a couple episodes ago, you're like, well,
that's another one.
we don't have anything to read. in the
We almost got a
mailbag, and now
We got a text. Hey, so if you did write us a review or you're going to write us a review, just shoot us an email at info@215podcast.com. Let me know what your screen name was, and then we'll send you some swag for helping us out. Here, you can read the first one. I love the screen name on this very first one here. Oh, actually, before we do that, though, we should mention that the reviews today are brought to you by our friends at Harvey Watt Insurance. You guys got to know about Harvey Watt, right? They're the insurance provider for all of the professional pilots, and they provide one of the most important products that every pilot needs, and that's your loss of medical insurance. If you understand how critical your medical is, then you understand how critical it is to protect yourself in case you lose it. Even if it's just temporary, you got to be able to put food on the table. Harvey Watt can help you with it. Visit harveywatt.com for more information.
All right, this review, Pilot Vanity Plate is his name or her name. These guys do a great job of addressing the many corners of the aviation industry. This would be a great podcast for any pilot to become better informed in an entertaining manner. Fun fact, there are a total of 6 pilots from Gen X still flying who went to Embry-Riddle, and you can hear from them all in this one convenient location.
I don't even... Okay.
Am I missing something? Or?
I don't know. I'm not in Gen X, I don't think.
What is Gen X? What
You're like
year?
you're the last year, I think, because you were born in what, 79?
Yeah.
And I think 79 is the cutoff. I think 80 it's millennial.
All right.
I like to say, I pretend and say I'm still Gen X. It sounds so much cooler than millennial. Go ahead. You're on a
Oh,
roll.
you're actually a millennial?
Yeah. Technically, like one of the first years, yeah.
All right. This one says entitled Amazing. Great podcast for any type of pilot, weekend warrior, airline pilot, corporate pilots. Every week that goes by is a week closer for a new episode. I can't wait to get some stickers to put on my cooler. And one day the mug for the small donation of $85. Parentheses a CFI here. CFI Jim Jr. Thanks.
Oh, we need a CFI discount, maybe.
Yeah, maybe we do.
Yeah. Because not everybody's...
That mixture, you know it's rich. Elon Musk. Hey.
Not everybody's rich.
CFI Jim Jr. running it lean. That's how he likes it.
That's how he likes it. He's going to richen it.
Also, Flaps 10.
Flaps 10. Getting his double eye soon, though. He's gonna
Let it do what it do.
in the eye, baby.
We got a double eye, baby. Woo! All right. Next one. Very informative. Max and Dylan do a great job of mixing advanced aviation topics for professional and aspiring professional pilots, as well as humorous and inoffensive stories. I eagerly wait each new episode and always find something useful. Best aviation podcast. IMHO.
Boom. Thank you. Awesome. I'm sending extra stickers.
Boom. All right. Couple donations.
Oh, yeah.
You want to do those?
Ben B bought our last tumbler. Thank you, Ben. And then Jim M also made a donation, but I'm out of tumblers, but I have a super secret mystery one-off gift to send him
Really?
of great value. It's that prototype we've been testing. I'm going to send it to him.
Oh, okay.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So thanks, Ben and Jim. We really appreciate it. We'll have a new product for you guys soon. If you make a donation, it should be exciting. Off to the mailbag. Very, very full mailbag today with a lot of comments about the trucky stuff. The mailbag, of course, is brought to you by our friends at Advanced Aircrew Academy. You can check them out at aircrewacademy.com. All of the learning modules that every business aviation operator needs. Your 135 recurrent training, specialty courses.
Well, they check all the boxes for required training.
Yeah.
Under 135 and things, but also there's a bunch of other stuff in there that's not
Elective.
necessarily. Yeah, elective.
Yeah.
Well put.
It's good stuff.
That's really good stuff.
aircrewacademy.com. Check out all of the offerings that they provide. Okay, email number 1 says, thanks for coming off vacation to do an episode on the truckie crash. I thought it was a level-headed take on an accident that I'm sure will be included in future recurrent classes once the NTSB has issued its report. Wish pilots as a whole were more rational and slow to jump to conclusions after incidents like this. It seems one of our core competencies, unfortunately, is to speculate wildly and pass on bad information. You guys do a good job of nixing the tendency and making sure pilots are better informed. Keep up the good work. On the topic of circling, I just did my first circling approach in the jet the other day, and after having done it only once before in the sim, it was as poorly executed as you can imagine. Throw in terrain and shifty winds and trucky, and I can easily see how things went south for the accident crew. I think there needs to be greater emphasis on circling and training, especially for 121 crews, as we do it so rarely in real life. Yet it is probably the riskiest approach we are authorized to do.
Well, we talked about this with Jason after we stopped recording.
Yeah.
And so I want to give him credit because I actually didn't know this, but the requirement from the FAA is it's a circling approach in training that's 90 degrees or more. Right. And the problem is, I don't know the statistics, but I would say the majority of circles don't require a 90-degree course change. And the problem is when you try and find all these approaches that have the right visuals and this and that, we end up doing them all at Memphis or whatever. And, you know, these handful of airports that are unrealistic. They train for the circle, you know, with starting the
follow the road and
follow the road.
There's a
until
building.
you see this and that. It's just terrible training, right? So,
yeah. Anyways, I'll finish the email. Yeah.
Maybe the FAA will, as a result of this. But like, again, Dave Keys brought up a good point.
Yeah, we'll cover it. Yeah. On the rare occasion that we need to do it, the lack of training combined with the lack of guidance, lateral, vertical, etc., puts us in a questionable corner of the risk matrix. I'd be interested to see FOQA ASAP data for circling approaches. I bet our collective performance is a bit less than stellar. Yes, we will get to that later in the episode. I enjoy the podcast a great deal. Keep doing what you're doing. You always have interesting guests, and I was especially delighted to listen to the episode with Bush pilot Liz. She is a friend from a former life, and it reminded me of how small the aviation community is. He'd like to hear more episodes with guests in other rarefied corners of the professional pilot community. We've got something
we
cooking
have something
for that.
in store for you.
Yeah. Fire bombers, which we already, air ambulance, etc. I think the young CFI crowd would be interested to learn that there are more and more interesting pilot jobs than just corporate and airline. Take care. Andrew in Michigan. Excellent email, Andrew. Thank you. I guess we already kind of discussed what his points were, but yeah, we agree. The circle stuff, what it is to dot the I and cross the T's is not what it's like in real life. But hey, guess what, Andrew? If you're out there, especially as a Part 91 operator, you may have to do a certain circle to complete the requirements of the training program, but it doesn't mean you can't ask to do a different one, more realistic one. Especially if you got some extra time.
It's
so,
especially even if you can't think of one, like the
Teterboro circle,
Teterboro
just
circle
do
is
the Teterboro,
with
a lot of wind.
Does.
With a lot of wind, that's a hard. All right, next email. Hey guys, I just listened to your most recent episode on the Challenger crash. I follow a guy on YouTube named Juan Brown, and he's where I recently learned that AWAS doesn't pick up smoke very well. So while the METAR may have reported 3 to 5 miles visibility in the Challenger crash, the smoke could have been actually worse. This could have been a contributing factor in the overshoot and potentially stall spin, since they may have been doing it at mins or maybe even less than the required visibility and didn't realize it. I haven't had the time to nerd out on this AWAS issue, but have done some flying this summer around a bunch of fires. I can see how this could be a big problem. Anyway, since you guys have a great platform to share that kind of thing, I just thought I'd share it as well. Keep up the great work. Love your podcast. Oh, he says we are his #1 podcast.
Does he live in the U.S.?
I hope so. We're definitely in the top 45 of everybody's aviation podcast, but we're in Mark's #1. So thank you, Mark.
Boom.
I don't know about the AWAS stuff. I haven't read this yet, but I'd like to take a look at it. I think there was a tower at Truckee.
Yeah, there was.
So it's probably not an AWAS. I got to be honest with you, though. I don't even think I know the answer, like how they're determining visibility at a tower. Or are they reading something off a screen? Or are they actually like using binoculars and looking, or not, or just looking out the window? I don't know
the answer to that question.
I don't know the answer to that one. So that's a good point, though.
I think it's actually a hybrid of observed visibility plus the machine.
Yeah.
But
either way,
probably a question for Jason Herman.
Yeah, exactly. Either way, though, you're right. The smoke really messes. It's really hard to see in smoke. Okay, last email here. Says, Dylan and Max, first, you guys have a great podcast. Second, I am familiar with Truckee from a smaller PC-12 aircraft perspective, as it is one of the airports we use for mountain flyouts from Santa Rosa, California. As you mentioned, wind can be a big factor. And as we pointed out, the big difference in the wind between the METAR before and after the crash could have been a factor. The METAR was the first thing I looked at when I heard of the crash that afternoon. Personal story, I postponed a flight with a PC-12 into Truckee one time due to the 35 to 40 knot winds at the altitudes of the mountain peaks and a couple of PIREPs for extreme turbulence. I did not think it was best for the new Pilatus pilot I was mentoring to take his family up to Truckee for the first time. We went the next morning, no difficulty. Good job. Third, pilots often overlook the impact of density altitude on the true airspeed and hence the no wind ground speed they may be moving at. While this does not change the circling category, it does require awareness to not overshoot the base to final turn, even in a no-wind condition. The temperature around the time of the accident was 32 degrees Celsius. The field elevation was 5,900. The density altitude was 9,100 feet. With an indicated airspeed of 140 knots, the true airspeed is closer to 160 knots. So the ground speed based on base is going to be 14% faster than at sea level. Combine that with the possibility of a bit of tailwind on base, and the pilots could be set up for a very challenging base to final turn. That's a good point. We've talked about that high true airspeed at altitude, especially when we're talking about landing and guys floating in the mountain airports and stuff. Sure. So it was a really good point. And that email was from our friend Jim. Appreciate that, Jim. Some really good points. And he made some other good points in the email as well. Didn't have time to read all of it. So thanks for writing in. If you have a email feedback for us, it's info@215podcast.com, and we'll be happy to read your
or anonymously via the website.
That's right. No flight advice this week, but we do have the flight advice form on the website you can send in. We can happy to provide our insight. Okay. Such a busy show. We should probably just get right to it. Joining us today, we've got our friend Jason Herman. He is the chairman of the Domestic Operations Committee for NBAA and a tailwheel pilot.
Current as of yesterday.
Oh, do you have a plane?
A good friend of mine has a Citabria, so I kind of bum around in that. Yesterday, unfortunately, I bummed 6.5 hours from Utah back to Orange County, so I was bebopping along at 10.5, but now the airplane's safe and sound in the hangar and ready to be enjoyed in SoCal.
And do you have to hold right rudder the entire time? Is there rudder trim in a Citabria? I don't even know. I've never flown one.
No, I have it trimmed out pretty well. It's got a nice ground adjustable tab. So
you flew a decathlon. It's almost the same thing.
Yeah, but I don't remember there being any trim in that.
Well, no. What small airplane have you flown that has rudder trim? See how out of touch you are?
I know. It's out of touch.
Embarrassing.
I'm not current. Anyways, enough of this. Jason is joining us. Jason's profile is blowing up with questions about the Pilot Records Database Act. And he's tired of answering all these DMs he's getting, and we just wanted to set the record straight.
Set the record straight.
There's a lot going on behind the scenes. Many of our listeners are probably familiar with PRIA, which was the database that kept all of our training records, and now there's kind of a new version of that. So, Jason, can you explain what's going on behind the scenes?
Yeah, so PRIA is basically being phased out in favor of the Pilot Records Database. This was something that Congress actually mandated. If you wind the clock back all the way as a result of the Colgan accident in Buffalo back, I think, in 2009. So as a result of that accident, the families of the Colgan 3407 victims included this in some legislation similar to the 1,500-hour ATP rule. This was included in a similar piece of legislation. So the FAA is about 11 years behind, and they're finally implementing this Pilot Records Database to replace the Pilot Records Improvement Act, which dates all the way back to 96.
Wow.
So can you talk a little bit about who's impacted here, and especially for business aviation folks?
Sure. So for a period of time, operators and affected parties will have to look at both complying with PRIA and the Pilot Records Database. So there's a bit of a transition period for the next few years. But overall, this effort, this Pilot Records Database, is going to effectively digitize all of the airman records, both on the FAA side and also on the operator side for those that fly for air carriers. And also now included in the rule are certain operators of two or more either jets or turbine-powered helicopters or any other aircraft that requires a type rating. So corporate operators, traditional Part 91 operators that have either an airplane and a helicopter or two airplanes or more will be impacted by this final rule. So initially, the FAA published a notice of proposed rulemaking, an NPRM. They floated that NPRM back around March of 2020. And then they recently aggregated a lot of those comments from various associations, MBAA and MBAA members, which significantly shaped the final outcome of that rule. And that was recently published about 2 months ago.
Can you share where the confusions or what people don't understand? What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, so one of the big improvements that the FAA recognized in the process going from a proposed rule to a final rule through comments from associations like MBAA and other members and affected parties in the industry, they recognize that a lot of Part 91 operators either don't maintain these training records or that many pilots are not moving on from 91 operators to a 135 or a 121 carrier, and they're not gateway carriers, as the FAA calls, as frequently as, say, a pilot moving from a regional airline up to a larger carrier. So as a result of that, corporate operators will likely not be significantly impacted in the Part 91 space. They'll be required to register. So that's the big takeaway right now, is to register as a responsible party. So either the chief pilot or director of ops by September 8th of 2021. So that's coming up just about in a month or so. So that's the big takeaway. And then operators can report their required training records upon request within 14 days if they receive a request from an entity. So that's the reason why the registration is required here coming up. That way they can respond to any requests.
Wait, so that's required for any responsible party or just two or more airplanes?
Just the operators that meet the definition in what's called the new Part 111 is that's one of the major benefits in this case. Is PREA happened to be a really old statute from 1996, and it was turned into an advisory circular, but it was difficult to find the actual statute and the regulatory language. So now this final rule for the pilot records database will be housed under Part 111, similar to other parts of the FARs like 61 or 91. And in Part 111, you'll find information about which operators are required to comply. But effectively, any corporate operator operating an airplane in furtherance of a business that operate two or more aircraft, either helicopter, turbine-powered helicopter, or a large aircraft requiring a type rating or a turbojet. So my phone's been ringing off the hook to answer questions from those operators that may have two or three plus aircraft.
And we don't know how it's going to be reported, the platform that's going to be used. A lot of the details are ironed out. Let's say you're the director for a small Part 91 Flight Department 2 airplanes. You have 3 or 4 pilots. Is this going to be a lot of extra work, or is this just going to be like a couple times a year you got to do something? Do you have any sense of how much extra work it's going to be?
So that's a good question. It depends on how many PREA requests you traditionally receive now or you have in the past. So if you're constantly getting PREA requests, it may be more time consuming in the future to upload these training records. One of the major differences as we transition from PREA to PRD is that traditionally you received a copy of your PREA records. If you were moving to a new employer, you probably saw this. Your previous employer would send your actual training records, like pieces of paper, either by fax or mail or email, with your actual training records. And every company has a different format. And so that's one of the benefits moving into the digital age here in 2021 with the pilot records database. All the relevant information as to what training you've completed and what was the outcome of that training. The FAA phrases it as satisfactory or unsatisfactory. That information gets extracted off the page and manually transferred over to the pilot records database. So the actual pieces of paper that we're used to seeing will go away.
Got it. So the big burden really where there's going to be a lot of work is on the 135 operators, right? That's where this is really kind of a big deal, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to be a huge burden on the 135 operators, solely because they're going to have to start uploading historical records that date back all the way to August of 2005. Some operators may not even have those records anymore. So it's going to be a pretty significant burden on the 135 side. The irony in the whole thing is that even if operators want to get a head start on this, the mechanism to upload those training records or those elements from training records hasn't been built yet. It actually won't be available until at least June of next year.
Of course.
So if you try to upload records, you won't be able to.
So practically speaking, from a pilot who thinks they're going to be applying for another pilot job in the future, well, what does this mean? What information is there? What's in addition to PREA? Like, can you just kind of break it down, like, for practically for aviators?
Yeah, so something that's caused anxiety for pilots in the past is, if they may have not a blemish on their record, but something that may be unknown from a unscrupulous operator in their past, what may exist, what that operator may transmit to a potential employer. And so long term, once PRD is fully implemented, this will allow pilots who hold an ATP or a commercial pilot certificate and a current medical to register for the pilot records database and see what those records are before granting consent to a prospective employer. So a pilot would be able to log in, take a look at all their records, review them, have an opportunity to dispute any items on those records before consenting to release of those records. Right now, you can register for the pilot records database, anyone that holds an ATP or a commercial, and you can log in and see your FAA records. So that's the current certificates you hold, and then any check ride busts, if you will, disapprovals since August of 2010. Those will be on the database. So you can do that right now and log in and take a look. And then as we approach the future, once PRD is fully implemented, pilots will be able to log in and look at all their records.
So if none of the training, this has nothing to do with CE or flight safety, right? You have to take the records from them as the operator and upload them. The FAA won't be requesting or anything from them directly, right?
That's correct, and they outline that in the what we call the preamble to the final rule. So all the additional text and context to the rationale behind some of the regulatory language in this new Part 111. They specifically mentioned that Part 142 training centers like flight safety or CAE won't have any direct involvement in uploading those records. Ultimately, it falls on the operator to upload those records. As a corporate operator, there's two requirements that may require you to upload those records within 30 days, as opposed to upon request within 14 days. And that has to do with termination of a pilot for pilot performance reasons and or the suspension of a pilot's duties due to pilot performance. So those are sort of two caveats. The FAA wants to be aware of those and have those in the database within 30 days of those occurring. But outside of those two situations, corporate operators will only have to respond for uploading training records upon request.
So it kind of sounds like if I'm just a regular line pilot for Part 91 or 135 or operator, really, I mean, it's good. This is a good thing, right? Because I'm going to have more visibility into my record. It's going to be easier for me to see what potential employers would have. So are there any downsides for your kind of average line pilot?
So I think the benefits outweigh the downsides, in my opinion, from a pilot perspective on this. There are a few. For example, your records are now retained until you reach 99 or when the pilot is deceased. So those records now stay a lot longer on the FAA's radar than previous, where it was only going back 5 years. You'll only be required to provide consent for your previous employers for the past 5 years, but the other records older than that still stay in the database. But from a pilot perspective, I agree with you. I think it gives more visibility. The other benefit I see going to a prospective employer is many times those requests are, I wouldn't say ignored, but they're not acted upon promptly, right? So if you go to an airline or a 135 operator, your previous employer may not respond for 20 or 30 or 40 days, even though they're required to respond within 30. Once these records are in the database, it's almost instant. So that prospective employer will have instant access once you provide consent to have all those records, and it speeds that process up. There's no fax machine anymore.
Would you give these consent for this as part of an interview, or would you give consent for a potential employer to access these prior to even like an airline? Would that be as part of like your application where they could potentially not even be interviewing people that have things in their past that they don't?
It could be. It's sort of like how PREA is used right now. You can request PREA prior to providing an offer, and most of those offers are contingent upon things like PREA and records. But that is a potential for the future for having those records requested prior to an interview or during the interview process.
So when I ran a one airplane flight operation, I got PREA requests for records. Does that mean now with this rule, if you operate a single, you're not required to contribute, but does that mean you're not going to get requests in the future once PREA's gone?
Those operators will still receive requests, but that operator with the training records only has to respond with what they maintain.
Yeah.
So one of the things that was mentioned in the final rule in the preamble was this rule does not increase the level of record keeping for Part 91 operators, because right now Part 91 operators are not required to maintain training records. Under Part 91, it really falls on the pilots to track their currency and instrument proficiency and anything that's required for required experience. So those operators will probably receive a request, but if there are no training records to report, particularly, for example, in the case of a contract pilot, or maybe that contract pilot engaged in an operation, whether they're employed on a W-2 or a 1099 basis, technically that person under the FAA's definition works for that operator. That operator may not have any training records. They didn't train with that operator. So those operators will probably receive those requests, but they may not have any records to report.
So do you think, Jason, after all the time that's passed, and do you think in the Colgan incident, this maybe would have prevented that whole thing? Or do you think it's just...
That's hard to say. And here's the irony I see with some of this. This is a record program. This is a pilot record database program. So because of that, operators are only required to transmit those records, and then the prospective employers are required to review them, but there's no requirement to have any justification as to hire or not hire a pilot. So they can choose to look at it and hire the pilot anyway, even if they have things in their past that may not be representative of employees that they're looking to hire. But, as we continue forward and staffing becomes challenging in the industry, there's no requirement for operators to justify why they hired a pilot with a certain background. So ultimately, I think this will allow greater visibility into some of those. I think in that particular case with the Colgan crash, there were some unsatisfactory check rides that were not apparently visible. And I think we've seen that in some subsequent accidents as well. So this will hopefully gain some visibility, and then prospective employers should have access to see if there are other records in the pilot records database that the pilot hasn't given consent for. So they'll be aware of those employers as well. So I think it'll gain some additional visibility, but I'm not sure if it would completely prevent. It's hard to say.
Sure. What about for initial flight training? Is it, if you're people that are failing an instrument check ride, for instance, will that will be in there as part of the FAA records then?
Yeah. So any unsatisfactory check ride, anytime you get a letter of disapproval for a practical test after August 1st of 2010, that date is significant in the context of when the legislation was passed that kind of started the clock. That'll be available in the pilot records database, but any unsat check rides prior to that date are available from the FAA, either if you do a Freedom of Information Act request, a FOIA request, or you yourself can request those records. That'll be available in Oklahoma City with the FAA, but they won't be on the database. So anything after 2010 will be on the database for that specific purpose.
Lucky for me, the letters of disapproval I received from my wife will not be in that database.
It's in a separate tab.
Yeah, nobody has the capacity for that kind of record keeping.
There's not enough storage for that. It's good. Now, last thing, Jason, let's say you mentioned an unscrupulous operator you work for. They put something in. Maybe it's malicious. Who knows? But you're a pilot and you see something in there. Is there some type of mechanism to dispute something? Or what do you do if you see something that's wrong?
Yeah, so operators can now go into the PRD once those records exist. As I mentioned earlier, you won't see that probably for another year or two in the PRD. But yes, there will be a dispute mechanism. But the FAA is going to try to stay out of that process. So you can mark it as in dispute, and you can try to work it out with that operator. It may not be malicious. It may be a wrong check mark or an error. Keep in mind, a lot of these historical records are likely going to be uploaded manually by a human. So
by an
that's
intern.
possible. Data entry intern. There's probably going to be a lot of those next summer. But specifically with regard to dispute, it talked the advisory circular associated with this, which is 12068 Juliet, which is a new advisory circular for the PRD, talks about the process. And so you can mark those records in dispute and try to work it out with the operator. And even if it's not worked out, you can still leave it marked as dispute, and then a prospective employer can see that.
I think what would be really interesting, Max, maybe we start like a mediation business for these PRD disputes, and we do it on the air. That'd be great ratings, I think. Be really interesting.
Now, tell me about the pilot
for
disciplinary action that take place.
What did you see? Okay, Jason, time for a little role playing here. I am a director of aviation, single airplane flight department. What do I need to do right now?
Wow, that sounds just like you. So if you're a Part 91 operator, one aircraft, there's no requirement to do anything additional beyond responding to requests.
Okay. I have two airplanes, or the airplane helicopter combo or whatever. What do I need to do?
So if they meet the definition, so they require a type rating or some combination thereof, turbine-powered helicopter, you're required by September 8th, so just coming up on a little under a month ago, to register for the pilot records database as a responsible person. And that process is completed on the FAA PRD website.
Okay. 135, obviously, same thing. Got to register.
Same thing for 135. And one of the challenges in the corporate space that we'll have to work through in the near future is aircraft operators that operate under a management company. That may be under a big management company, but technically it falls on the operator of the aircraft. I'm just thinking here out loud, the name on the LOAs, for example, that's going to be the entity that's responsible for reporting it. We may see management companies offer to upload these records as a proxy, which is permitted by the FAA, but something to think about and work toward. Another question that has popped up is occasionally some operators that operate 91, but they also have a 135 certificate. And how do you handle that with some pilots that are 91 and others that are 135?
Okay. I'm a regional airline pilot. Do I need to do anything? I want to get a job at a major. I'm getting my applications ready. Is there anything I have to do?
Nothing's required, but you may want to register for the pilot records database just to see what's up there right now. You'll see those records populate in the near future, but the FAA records are available. You can take a look at those right now.
Oh, okay. So I just use my ATP certificate number and I can get that all signed up and
yep, absolutely.
Background. Okay, that's good. I should probably set that up. I'll put a link in the show notes for the platform to do that, but that's probably good for any professional pilot. Anyone else that we didn't hit that needs to do something?
Not at the moment. It's important to recognize Part 125 operators are now included in this as 91K. There's not too many 91K operators, but 125 is corporate shuttle, so large aircraft. So they now have some specific requirements that are a little different. So check out the advisory circular that breaks it down. And also NBAA is working on a new resource to kind of help parse out the advisory circular, make it a little bit more easy to comprehend. So look for that in the near future.
Good stuff.
Great. Well,
Exciting.
Jason, I'm on some of the committees, the subcommittees that you're involved with. And I just want to share with the folks that maybe don't have the insight. There was a lot of work put in from NBAA and other groups to provide comments on this. And the original language and where it ended up, there were some big changes, especially for business aviation operators. And so I just want to salute you and the other folks that were involved in that process. And I think that's one of the huge values of NBAA and other trade groups is, there's only so many people that are going to get in there and read those proposed rulemaking language and provide thoughtful comments. So I think it's a really valuable service that you provide to folks. So I just want to say thanks and encourage folks to reach out to their representatives and say thanks.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. It's important to note on the back end, a lot of these comments by the association are formed by volunteers on these committees that have a lot of insight. So there's a lot of value there just by fellow volunteers in the industry. And then there were over 500 comments from NBAA members in the Federal Register. So a big thanks to those operators too that stepped up and provided their thoughts. And
it makes a difference. I mean, there were changes were made, right? Directly because of those comments.
Yeah. So corporate operators previously under the proposal, they were going to have to report just like any other entity, not upon request. So they were going to have to start uploading all these records. There was some discussion about making them upload historical records back to 2005 or 2010. So a lot of those burdens have been resolved through those comments and considerations by the FAA. So a huge win for business aviation.
Awesome. Well, thanks for all your hard work on this, Jason. Appreciate you dispelling some of the
Thank you, Jason. Yes,
explaining how it's all going to work.
Always a veritable cornucopia of knowledge.
Absolutely, guys. Keep up the good work. Thanks.
See you next time. Let her rip. Us with Dave.
All right, Max. Joining us on the line today is our friend, mentor. Is he a father figure? I don't know.
Grandfather figure.
That's her grandfather. That's right. Our friend Dave Keys. He's the chairman of NBAA's Small Flight Department Committee. You're also affiliated with, what is it, the Central Florida Business Aviation Association?
The current president of the Central Florida Business Aviation Association.
All right.
You really know how to find those high-paying side gigs.
I know, really. It just, it's the title.
I call it NIPA, non-income producing activity. Dylan is the master of.
That's
He's
exactly
master of
right.
that.
Yes.
Well, Dave, we wanted to have you on the line today. You sent us a real well thought out email with feedback regarding our discussion about the Truckee crash. We received more feedback in the first 7 days on that episode than we've ever received about another episode. We set download records for that episode. So clearly that topic resonated with our listeners. So we thought we should continue the conversation. So you had a few great points in your email that you sent to us. I was just wondering if you could kind of share your thoughts with the listeners, and we'll discuss a little bit.
Well, I think my first communication with you was I've not shouted on my radio in a while, except when I was listening to you guys. Like, wait a minute, you've missed a few of the important points. But I understand that, and I'll hit the highlights, and then we can kind of dive into whatever area you want. That my first point was that it was not a circle approach; it was a visual approach, and I think our industry has lost that distinction, and I just wrote a little blob on LinkedIn that I posted today about that. Like, why have we lost as professional pilots? Whether we're in the commercial field or the business field, have lost the ability to do visual approaches. And we'll talk about that. There was also weather to the west of the airport, which may have influenced their decision. Nobody mentioned any of that, but if you pull up the radar for that date, there were storms that may have interfered if they tried to do the approach coming in that way, or they saw buildups and decided they didn't want to go in that way.
Sure. And just to clarify, we had talked about that straight in approach. Right. Why didn't they do that instead of doing the circle? And so, yeah, Dave's point is there could have been weather. We don't know.
Right. I think one of the points I wanted to make when we talk about an accident like Truckee or any of them, that the safety experts will tell you it's never just a one failure. Remember the model, we all learned it. The Swiss cheese lines up and the failure chain is connected. And so I think we do it injustice when we say it's they stalled the airplane. There's a simple, this is it. And safety experts and the investigators know that that's not true, that there was a chain of events that lined up. And so we need to be conscious of that and figure out, oh, okay, there was probably more contributing. Now, the final might have been this, but what got to that point? And sometimes that's more important than what actually happened when we look at it. The other thing, in our side of the industry, especially business aviation, I think we are too busy criticizing those that have an accident versus using it as an opportunity to hold a mirror up to our own operations. Business aviation has the worst safety record of any segment of aviation currently. And we need to ask the question why? What are we not doing? What can we be doing better? What can all those people that commented on the different forums, do you have a vibrant SMS program? What safety mechanisms have you put in place? How do you handle a contract pilot? All of those questions that come into play, that it's just, oh no, these guys just screwed up. Well, wait a minute. Can you get there? And what are you doing to mitigate your issues? Because we don't have a good record. At least once a month, somebody's running off a runway or killing people. So that was kind of the big email I sent in a nutshell.
You make some really good points, Dave. And I think the other thing that I've been thinking about that encompasses this as well, since we had that discussion, Dylan and I did, is the Part 91 segment of aviation, we said, gives you kind of the most rope to hang yourself with because you have the most latitude to do whatever. And I think that the problem is in the industry, people aren't taking enough responsibility for that. And what I mean is you're 91 and you can have the most latitude to do whatever you want, but you need to also take the responsibility in the form of training, right? We do these 91 events, and they can be the easiest, quickest, bang out the bare minimum requirements and go home thing, or you can really turn it into a learning experience and really push the limits of yourself and the airplane and figure out where that is, because you're one of the few people flying jets that can actually do a circle at 400 feet EGL or whatever it is, whereas a lot of commercial operators have restrictions, and we can do a contact approach, and we can do a lot of things that a lot of everybody else can't do. But I think that if you don't change how you look at your operation and train for that, and because you have the ability to operate on a higher level or with lesser margin, I guess you could say. And if we don't take responsibility to that as an industry as a whole, we will lose that additional latitude that we enjoy. Because the FAA is going to look at it and be like, look, if these guys are under Part 91 are having these accidents and they're doing flying approaches that most of the commercial operators don't have op specs for or whatever, they're just going to tighten the leash on us. And I don't know about you guys, but I enjoy having the latitude in it, and I've utilized it. I flew a contact approach 2 weeks ago in a situation where it was warranted, because it was raining here, the visibility, the clouds, all of that stuff. There wasn't good approaches to get to the airport. I couldn't see the airport exactly, but I could see all the landmarks, and I knew exactly where the airport was. And that was a great opportunity to use that instead of the guy behind me going missed and flying back out for the missed approach and trying the approach to somewhere and doing all this extra stuff that we didn't have to do because of that latitude. But that was just an example that I thought of, and sooner or later they're going to close the noose up.
I agree with you. I'm surprised that those conversations haven't begun already. And
Part 92, it's coming.
Our fear was, Max, which is tying two things together, but when the FAA tried to define a Part 91 corporate flight department under the latest pilot record database legislation, we fought really hard because we thought that would give them the definition they needed at that point to now start creating rules and regulations specific to Part 91 business aviation. And we enjoy those luxuries, but we abuse them, unfortunately. And our record shows.
And I think, I don't know all the details of this operation, so I don't want to say this operation specifically, but I have been involved in other operations, especially where a lot of contract pilot is used, and that's when a new entity purchases an airplane a lot of times. And there's just not a lot of the infrastructure that you're talking about, SMS programs and some of the other safety tools. It's not that maybe they don't want to use it, but it's just not there yet. And I think that's a real high risk time, because you've got new people coming together, maybe the brokers using pilot, you never know, but there's just a big hodgepodge of stuff there. And a lot of the safety precautions aren't in place. You have crews that maybe haven't flown together. Maybe it's people buying a new airplane and one of their pilots isn't experienced, like we've heard, we don't know, but we think may have been the case in this. So I think Part 91 especially has a lot of those operational challenges that some of the other parts don't have because of these transactions and other new elements.
Exactly. And you think about it, the two things come to mind is that out of all the various operations, commercial 135, Part 91, we probably do more visual approaches than any other segment of aviation. And I think it's a losing art. I watch professional pilots that I fly with try and do a visual approach, and sometimes it's the scariest thing that I experience. First thing, their head goes down. I'm going to play with the box because either the numbers are the wrong runway or whatever, so you're going to get squawked at, or I want to put a center line. And it's like, dude, fly to the airport. Do the basics that we learned in training. Pick out your reference points. Where am I going to make this turn? Where's the 45? How should I configure the airplane? None of that runs through their mind when they're doing and I'm like, why are we going stupid from the private pilot exam to flying a corporate airplane? I had to tell a guy, this was a couple of years ago, he's like all over the sky, put the end of the runway in the center of the windshield and it'll work. And he goes, oh.
Yeah, it's funny. So what I do, and I the guy I fly with and I now, whenever we do, and I've done this for a long time, when I do a visual approach and I click off the autopilot, the first thing I do is turn off the flight director, and you just fly it on raw data, and that makes you not fly with the crutch of the flight director and couple up the ILS and all this stuff when it's clear in a million. And so he does that now, and it's just one of those things. And the other thing too, at my airline, they require that you turn the auto throttles off. And when I flew the 452, we would click the auto throttles off, and you have to flying a visual approach, manipulating the thrust levers, all of that is a perishable skill. Where if you do not use it, you will lose it. So. And you've seen people just like I have, where that skill is degraded to a scary point. And that doesn't mean it's everybody. Certainly, a lot of business aviation guys are very critical of the airline guys, thinking, "Oh, you can't fly." There's some guys that are really good sticks and could do whatever they want with a 737 or whatever. And then there's some that really use all those crutches probably a little bit too much. And that was evidenced because I had always flown with the flight director off when I fly a visual approach. And when I went to the airline, I got out the book and looked up to see if I'm allowed to do that or not. And sure enough, there's nothing prohibiting you from doing it. And really, it actually was more restrictive, if I remember correctly, where it says if you're going to have flight director guidance up, you have to set the mode control panel so it's giving you good guidance. It's not just trying to fly you in a left-hand turn when you're turning right. And that's more of a distraction. It's easier just to turn it off and just look out and fly. And I did that, and that startles some people in the airline business. I turn it off.
But I know, because they're not used to it.
What are you doing?
I mean, there are some aircraft that define that you must have an electronic arrival. You're not allowed.
And there's not a lot of places in the airline, especially the larger airline business, where you can do that. You're not really going to be doing that in Denver or Chicago or places like that. But if you're going to Lubbock or Midland, Odessa, or some of these other places where they just say, "Yeah, you're clear for the visual" when you're 15 miles out or whatever, then that's a good thing to do, in my opinion.
So let's talk about this for a second. Oh, I'm sorry, Dave. Go ahead.
No. And then God forbid that they change to the parallel runway, because where's the pilot's head go? Right down to the FMS.
Cranking the heading bug around a million times. It's just easier just to look outside.
And what it does is I'll finish and then you go to your question, Dylan. But because we're not doing that, when you get into the situation that they had a truckie, you don't know, you've lost the skills of defining what the visual approach look like. What are your I always pick out landmarks. Okay, what's a lake? What's a water tower? Where should I be making my base leg for this runway that's far enough out that I'm going to have the time and the turn? And so when you're not practicing it, you get out of that mindset, then you find yourself in a situation that you shouldn't be in.
The thing for a pilot too is you have to be able to look at yourself and realize when those skills have perished and be big enough to say, "Hey, I need to do something about this," and recognize your weakness, which is a really tough thing for a lot of aviators to do. I remember when I was a flight instructor, and Dylan, you probably remember this, I could tell you how many miles I was from the airport by looking outside to an extremely high degree of accuracy. And then I recognize now, they say, how far from the airport? What's the first thing you look at? The FMS. Yeah.
The captain.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was one of the things I realized. I'm like, God, I used to be really good at this. And that was one of the things that I tried to clean up in my own personal flying to get back to being able to just look outside and figure out how far I was away and not have to look down all the time. But I think that's a huge obstacle as people, just guys or gals, have to be able to have some self-reflection and realize where they're lacking.
Now let's talk about, one, you maybe identify there as a weakness. How can we as operators, you guys are both directors for small flight departments, what's a realistic way we could incorporate this into our operation as a way, you could talk to your other crew member and say, "Hey, here's how we're going to keep our visual approach skills sharp." Obviously, I think we can all agree the simulator is not really a great place to practice that. It's unfortunately just beyond the capability of what it can do. So what's a good way in our operation that we could actually think about keeping those skills sharp? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think doing it, it's like anything else. When you don't do it, you lose it. So when you come into an uncontrolled airport and you're going to do a visual approach, click it off, click, and practice it. Enter a downwind, enter a base, enter a final, make, and get your reference points for the speed of the airplane and what your power settings, how, all the feel that it takes. We are in this autopilot driven world where our guys will leave the autopilot on and they'll heading it around, the auto throttles have it, they're BSing down until they're 400 feet and then click, click, land the airplane. And what have you gained by doing that? You've now set those skills aside. You're letting the airplane do it. And I think we just need to get, as pilots, we need to just say, especially the airports we serve. And that's why I said I think business aviation is unique in that, because we serve a lot of uncontrolled airports with a lot of visual approaches, and we have a lot of opportunity to practice, and we just don't because we're lazy.
And the other thing too is, do you have to deny yourself the crutches that people flying transport category airplanes can use by the flight director and VNAV, glide path, or the ILS? And if you think that's, you don't have to do that with the reduction in safety. You can tell the other non-flying pilots, say, hey, I'm not going to look at this stuff. You look at it. If you see an issue, let me know. But this is what I'm trying to accomplish. I think the other thing too, Dylan, is where you say the visual approach and visual stuff is not that the simulator is not a great place to train for that. For a straight visual approach and things like that, I agree. But some of the things that I think the simulator is a really important place to train visual maneuvers is things like a dual engine failure, things like that, because that shows you how much you know your airplane and how to manage the energy of that airplane, because every airplane slows down at a different rate depending on how much flaps you add and things like that. And those are things that you need to know just in case, because just like if you're in a Sully situation or whatever, but dual engine failures have happened, and there's a lot of birds out there and all that stuff. And so that's a place where I told my co-pilot, I'm like, we will be doing dual engine failures at unannounced times. We're going to tell the guy. And the other thing too that's really cool is you have to look at some of the resources. I'm really excited to go to training here next month, or this month, I guess. They have a brand new simulator we're going to be training in, CE, and it has the smoke generator. And from what I understand, it's not just the fog, like with the liquid. It's an actual burner box where they put wood chips in it. It puts real acrid smoke into the simulator, and it has like a system to exhaust it outside the building when you're done. But it's going to be like real deal. Like, you better put the smoke goggles on.
Or they're cooking steaks down there, and you'll have lunch. Yeah.
I don't know how it's going to work with a mask on and then putting the other mask on top of it and all this, but we're going to figure it out. It's going to be really interesting. So I'll see. Maybe they'll have some video. We can bring some of that home. Who knows?
We're doing it. The 604 simulator doesn't have that technology, but we just got an instructor that uses a vape pen.
He's just going to blow it up.
That's how we're doing it. It's a little cheaper. Yeah, he's just going to smoke it. No, so here's another question, because I agree with everything you're saying. Hey, we're going to do some visual approaches. How do we balance that with, we're flying with people on board, getting reps? Like, I think there's a little bit, especially in Part 91, there's pressure. I need to make this a smooth approach. I need to use every tool available so that I make this the safest landing or the most comfortable landing for my passengers. I know there are some empty legs every once in a while, but I think that I've run into that resistance before with people that I've flown with. How do we overcome that argument, or how do we balance, giving a good product to our passengers, but also maintaining proficiency?
The sad part with that is that attitude prevents the go around. And that's where guys in our side of the industry get into trouble. And Max will tell you, at his airline, the go around is celebrated. If it doesn't look right and you bingo it, you're good. Nobody's calling you on the carpet. In fact, they're going to say, good job, go for it. And because of that pressure that most of the time we put on ourselves, the folks in the back aren't putting that pressure on you. Everybody I've ever worked for, we always laughed if the landing was a little bumpy or something, and I'd get up and say, hey, the chiropractor will be seeing you all this afternoon. And they laugh and they get off the airplane and away they go. So I've never felt the pressure like, oh, I need to fly this airplane in a way that would not be unsafe to satisfy them. So I think you really need to question who's putting the pressure on, and is it you or is it your passengers? And I think 99.9% of the time it's you. You guys talked about on your last podcast, the ego that comes involved. And when you do, now you have taken yourself out of options that may save your butt at times, because now you'd be less likely to say, this doesn't look right. Let's go around. What would have happened in trucking if those guys at some point said, yeah, this doesn't look right. Click, click, click. Let's go around, do a pattern, come back in and land. We wouldn't be talking about it today.
Yeah. It's
right.
a lot of us getting over ourselves and either knowing when to go and not try and salvage something that's not working out. Or one of the other things too, I wanted to bring up, guys, is when I came back to I'll say the modern airline world, which was different when I was there initially. That was, I think this will be beneficial for a lot of business aviation people, because I didn't understand how this all worked. And so there's programs called FOQA or FDAP at other airlines. We've talked about this. They basically record parameters of the airplane and they download it or transmit to the company, and there'll be flags if you weren't stabilized at 1,000 feet, and depending on thrust lever angle, airspeed, vertical speed, all this different stuff. And it flags touchdown. If you're touching down outside the touchdown zone, it flags all these different things. And they use it only for safety. It's not for punishment. And so the way the airlines maintain their safety record a lot of times is they can identify trends in that data and say, okay, people going into this airport are landing long 20% more than any other airport we serve, or people are doing unstabilized approaches. And we see all this data. It's all to the pilots. And then what they do is they tailor the training to train out of the pilot group these problems. So if you take that down to guys like us three who are running a one airplane operation, and it's just us, you're the one that has to observe and see where your shortcomings are, and then you have to do something about it in the terms of training it out or changing a procedure or whatever. And I think if we can model that model, it's really amazing, because and then you'll see they'll put this extra training in that year's training event to train this deficiency out, and then you'll look at the results of that, and it works. Like these problems stop. And that's what, as smaller operators, or really any business operator, nobody has that, and it's coming to it's trickling down, but certainly not going to get to the level we're at for a really long time. But I think that responsibility falls on you to realize where your shortcomings are, and then figure out how to do something about it. Whether that's, like Dave was saying, about finding a visual approach and forcing yourself to do it with less automation or other crutches, or landing long, or whatever it is. You just have to be active about it and recognizing it, and then doing something about it.
Here's the problem we face, Max, and I've been preaching this for a couple of years, and Dylan has heard it, that part of our objective is to get flight pilots to hold the mirror up to themselves and do an honest evaluation. One thing I noticed for me, we were landing long because we wanted smooth landings. And so it was like, which is fine if we're landing in, Orlando or, someplace that has a 12,000 foot runway. But most of our operations aren't that. In fact, we go in and out of a 4,000 foot runway sometimes. So we had to have an honest conversation to say, look, going forward, we need to land in the touchdown zone, period. Except, if you can land smooth, fine. If you can't, take what you can get and that. But it's being honest enough to hold the mirror up and say, what are we not doing? Now, most departments don't have a mechanism to do that, that's why I hark back. All those people that commented on the forums, what is your mechanism so that you're a safe operation? What are you putting in place to do that evaluation? The egos become involved, and they never have it, which is the frustrating part for me, that you're a professional aviator. Somebody's paying you good money to fly their airplane safely. And you go about it in a lackadaisical way, and you do not challenge yourself. You do not honestly evaluate yourself. You don't ask the questions. You choose not to set up a safety system. You do all those things, and then but yet you can sit on a forum and bash guys that crashed an airplane. And I go, yeah, no thanks. So how do you do that? My hope is that we become professionals in our end of the industry, and we start asking those questions of ourselves and each other. and that we embrace what it means to be a professional pilot, and we transition into that.
With great power comes great responsibility.
There you go. That's right.
The thing about it that's so different on both sides of this professional pilot table we have of the airlines and business aviation is that at the airlines, in that system, you don't have much control over that. You do the training. There's other people that handle that. If you want to be involved in that stuff, you have the opportunity to, but normal day-to-day, the majority, you don't have to think or put in that effort, or you just take it as it comes and do what you're supposed to do and fly by the book. The difference here is that, like Dave said, you have a choice, and you can choose to do the bare minimum, or you can choose to try and better yourself and show professionalism. And at the end of the day, that might save somebody's life. And that's where people need to step back initially right now and look at themselves and say, hey, am I doing everything I can do to be the best at this job and keep everybody safe? It's a tough question to ask yourself sometimes.
And you made a statement, and I've used this comment through my whole career, that especially in business aviation, and I've been fortunate to have good relationships with my principals, and I've told each one of them, I like you, you pay me very well, I love me, I'm going to make decisions on what's good for me. You get the benefit of it. And you know what's interesting? Every one of them, and these are very powerful people, have said, if that ever changes, you let me know, because we might go find us another pilot. I said, well, yeah. So it's not even what the guy in the back or the gal in the back. It's about what's best for you. Are you going to come home to your family? And why would you make a choice? Why would you not be critical about who you are? I mean, you guys were flight instructors, and you would give the student, after a flight, you'd evaluate them, you'd send them home and say, think about it, come back tomorrow, we're going to work on these things again. So they had the opportunity. Once again, do we just set those on the shelf and not ever do that again now that we're a professional pilot? I think one of the things we're working on is a simplified safety process for small departments. And I think what I've learned is one of the most effective tools that I'm hearing from those that have it. We've not implemented it yet, but we're moving that direction. Is the post-flight brief that takes 5 minutes. Both pilots sit there and evaluate what went right, what went wrong, what do we need to change, are there anything we need to address, and everybody I've talked to that uses that said does change the way their department is functioning.
I think it goes along with our conversation of how in touch with your ego are you, and how open to you are to listening to that stuff. We had something similar to that at a former operation. It was, I can't remember. Do you remember the thing in Seinfeld that was called Festivus?
Yeah.
You know?
Oh yeah.
And then they had the poll, and then they had the thing that was like the airing of grievances. The other pilot and I, we basically decided we would have this like yearly airing of grievances. And a lot of it was more like, hey, you know, like some technical stuff. Oh, we need to change this checklist and do a lot of this stuff. But what we would do is every year we would try and challenge ourselves to do one thing better. Pick one simple thing that, hey, you know, let's try and do this better. But even that, when you can set those egos aside and have those conversations, that's the hardest part of the whole deal.
It's hard,
in my opinion, especially in business
hard
aviation.
to tell somebody, and it's hard to listen to it. When I flew with the same guy for 8 years, we had something called the no BS debrief, and the only requirement is that we both had to have a beer in our hand. And so after we'd fly,
there you go.
And we'd clean up the airplane, whether at home or on the road, and we'd sit down, we'd have the beer, and we'd tell each other what we could have done better. And it's hard initially, and you still get that reaction where someone tells you, well, you floated too long. You landed outside the touchdown zone. How are we going to fix that? And you get defensive. And what I found interesting is that actually sort of went away with time. And when you were used to hearing criticism from the other person you fly with, it became more constructive because everybody got less defensive, which I didn't expect. But that really kept us operating, I felt like, at a really high level, because we knew too that there was no escaping your shortcoming, because we were going to talk about it, and then we were going to figure out what to do about it. And we didn't always have something to say, but a lot of times we did, and that was I felt like we really brought us to another level of working together.
After the flight, Dave, for you guys, do you have like a standard, like, hey, what went well, what went bad? Do we need to change anything? Or is it more of a conversation that's tailored just by the flight and, hey, what happened?
Yeah, ours, I want to move to a more of a formal debrief, like 5 minutes, and we're not there yet. Part of it is we just new airplane, new pilot. So I'm trying to put together our safety system after having learned a lot. So right now it's more of just a conversation but I want something that's just a little bit more formal to where we both feel, kind of check those boxes. And if there's something and there's some great models that we've looked at. They're just little cards. I mean, I've got one sitting on my desk. It's like, it has, I think, 3 or 4 things four questions that you just review. And it literally takes 5-6 minutes, unless you hit on something and you need to talk about it. But yeah, it opens up number one, it's like, you have to deal with your own ego. So that's a good thing. And then it opens up the communications so that somewhere in the flight, if you now are breaking down some of those walls regardless. So if there's something needs to be said in the midst of a visual approach where somebody's getting low or banking too hard, you're not afraid to say something because hey, we've already built this relationship. The problem with this is it's hard if you've got a contract guy sitting in that seat who you have no relationship with. And now, how do what does that dynamic look like? And that's going to be completely different than the 2 guys that have built a relationship.
I think at the end of the day, everybody that was so critical of the pilots in Truckee on social media and everywhere else, and PJP and everybody, I would challenge you to say, are you that critical of yourself when you fly? And that pretty much sums it up, right?
Right. That's what I was yelling at the radio.
We heard you, Dave.
that was one of the things. Yeah, exactly.
And and I posed this question on LinkedIn, and I said, when there is an accident and we don't have all of the facts, is it okay to discuss right away? And can we speculate, and can we try and figure out the cause, and can we have discussions? And I've seen a lot of really good stuff from a conversation standpoint come out of this, but it's like these kind of conversations that are more introspective on your operation versus trying to figure out exactly what happened. And kind of my last observation, and we talked about this, or you talked about this in the email you sent us, was on the main conversation we saw, everyone was arguing about circling minimums and categories, and it was this black and white topic that I think people were gravitated to because it was easy to argue a point, on one side or the other, and it really helped you avoid introspection and maybe kind of looking in the mirror. And I think that's part of the nature of pilots. We got a lot of listener feedback emails that focused on, the legalities and the interpretations of the SAFO and the working groups and all of this kind of stuff, which is important and it's great to understand, but I think it's easy to really get stuck in the weeds, especially with a lot of like type A perfectionist type folks.
I learned from that discussion, and so I would say it's okay to discuss. It's not okay to conclude, because while there's a ton of information available these days, every year it seems like there's more and more. It certainly isn't and will never be all of the information that's available to us that are just looking from the outside.
Right.
So but the discussion certainly spurs thought, and I learned some stuff about the FAA and the language change and the circling stuff and all of that. I mean, that's good. That's how one of those things we talk about, especially with Part 91 people, where we don't have as many formal retraining requirements. So this is the kind of thing where how you keep the tip of the spear sharp and keep the education ongoing.
But we do. That's exactly. So our focus now moves to this finite examination of what a regulation says or a procedure. I mean, you start a controversy and poses a question about V1 or climb gradient, and you'll blow the forum up for 10 pages as people try to explain that. And that was the other. It wasn't a circling. They did not clear them for a circling approach. Nowhere in the clearance was you are cleared to circle. You are cleared to land. And she gave her the option. You can overhead and go to 2.9 or you can go to 1.1. And then somebody says, well, that's not authorized. It was a visual approach. It was authorized. You can, as long as you maintain clearance, don't run into the mountain.
That was an excellent
you can land
point.
on any runway. But yeah, but now we want to finite on the legalities of the circling approach when that had nothing to do with what they were doing. And that was my point, that it was a visual approach in restricted somewhat visibility. We went into Lebanon, New Hampshire a couple weeks ago, and the smoke from out west is hit. And I do this approach all the time, land on 3.6. It's our RNAV approach that brings you in at an angle. And there's a little hill, so it's a very hilly. But there's a microwave tower, 3.5 mile final, that if you're visual, that's what they. And we could not see that stinking airport, and they were calling it 3.5 miles in smoke. And it's like, normally at this point, I would see the airport, no problem. So finally it was, all right, click, click. I got the microwave tower. Let's just fly to the microwave tower because I know that's a 3.5 mile final to 3.6. And by the time we got to the microwave tower, there's the runway. It worked out. But there was a disorientation because of the smoke. So it's easy to see in the visual how they got disoriented. And that's a fair comment. You could, but that's where I get back to a click, click, go around. Let's come back and try it again or do something different. That attitude, I don't want to generalize because I know we'll get bashed a lot. The airlines drive that point home, and Max will verify that. In training at Southwest, man, if there's a question, go around. We won't even need to talk about it. In Part 91, we are so hesitant. We're going to rescue it. We're going to figure out how to make this work. Versus, hey, let's just buy another one. We'll come around and do it. So I don't know how that's a good challenge. How do we integrate that attitude into our end of the industry? We haven't figured that one out yet.
Everyone listening, go do a visual approach to a go around on your next leg.
Yeah.
Work on your proficiency. They won't even know what's going on. It'll be so disorienting. No, that's really well said, Dave. We've talked so much about communicating with your principal this year. Maybe that is something that you discussed with them. Hey, there's a new professionalism initiative, or we're trying to be better, and we're sharpening our skill, and this is something that could happen. And I think, how many principals really even understand what a go-around is? Maybe they don't. I don't know. And so kind of removing some of those barriers before they even happen might make it a little safer. I remember, or a little less contentious. I remember I had to do a go-around in the Challenger in Sun Valley, Idaho, of all places, which is a huge gust of wind at the final approach. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to land in the touchdown zone. And so that was that, and it was a visual. It's a beautiful day. But I mean, going around, and it was a charter passenger in the back, and he had no idea what was happening. And that added a really complex layer because he was freaking out in the back, and the flight attendant's going, he's freaking out. What's going on? And so I don't know, maybe that type of conversation would be a good place to start for the visuals and for the go around stuff.
Very likely. Yeah. Because they don't know. I mean, you're in the back, and I've been on airliners that had to go around, and you kind of
everybody's startled.
There's an uncertainty, like, oh, I wonder what happened. Yeah. So, but the worst thing you want to do is in the middle of the go around.
That's what I was going to say. I've had that same experience, and maybe it's prudent to explain, hey, this is something that happens, and I think. Say it may not be anybody's fault at all. It may just be things didn't feel right, and we're just going to try it again. It's a safety thing, but I'll explain to you what happened. You just got to do me the favor of waiting till I explain it to you, because I know it's going to be unsettling and a little weird, but I'll be in touch with you. It's just a high workload time, and the best thing you can do is just hang tight.
And like Max and I both mentioned, our principals both contacted us after this crash, and And we can use that as a good opener to starting that conversation. Hey, here's some new data we've learned, or here's a way that everyone's improving their operation. So, this go around could have been something that saved this airplane. And so we're going to, work at making our operation better by possibly doing this. So I want you to understand, this is what happens. And exactly like you said, we'll tell you later, but we're busy right now. But the airplane's not falling apart. We're not going to anything like that freaks people out. So
exactly. No, I think that's a good point. And you use the word there, which I thought that's where we fault. And that's where we go. It's kind of like, now I have to, okay, was it my fault that we had to go around? That's where I think the airlines are doing a great job in they're changing that perception. In other words, they're not going to blame if you go around.
It's almost a reward now. It's like, good job.
In fact,
yeah,
right. There's a praise. Right. So that's the first conversation we need to have with ourselves, to say, no, that's not a fault. It's not somebody's fault. You made the right choice. Great for you.
And I think when under Part 91, especially when the passenger oftentimes is the same person that's signing your paycheck, there's that accountability, and versus an airliner or even in charter where the passenger is just maybe the first and the last time you'll ever see that person. And there's a lot more accountability, which I think drives that hesitancy to, make a firm landing on a wet runway, or to go around and not try and salvage something.
And if you're going around on every approach, then there probably is an issue. But the infrequency that you are probably going to have to do it or want to do it is not. It should not. Right? It should just be that. Look, it just didn't work out, and no hurt, no foul. We're gonna walk away.
Well, Dave, appreciate the feedback. This is what makes this show so great, and I think kind of what we're talking about with the ego stuff is Max and I like to put these discussions out there, and we almost love to hear when we're wrong or we miss something, because that's when we can all learn together. So I encourage any of our listeners, when we're discussing topics, if they've got some knowledge to share or good insight, shoot us an email. It's info@215podcast.com. We can continue the discussion. Iron can sharpen iron, and we can all get smarter together. And Dave, before we let you go, got any good stories for us lately?
Yeah. Well, we talked about training, and this story came to my mind the other day. Years ago, I flew the Saberliner, and I was out in training, and my co-pilot and I, walked into the room, and there was the room was filled with 3 other crews, all from Mexico, and they were pretty funny guys. And the way flight safety used to do it then is you had systems all during the day, and then late that afternoon, another instructor came in and did performance. And so it was a long day. But when we started the training, there was one of the Mexican pilots. He goes, "Senor, before you begin, I want to tell you that there will be no emergency and no abnormal that we're going to go over that I have not had." And of course, we all laughed. And he goes, "No, I am serious." He goes, in fact, his airplane caught on fire coming out of Acapulco with the tail. When he flew back in, landed, the tail fell off. Anybody that's flown Saberliner knows that story. So anyway, that evening we're going to do performance, and of course we didn't have computers or APG or any of that back then. And so the instructor comes in. He goes, "Well, let's put it on the board. Hot, high, heavy. Mexico City. From here, how much fuel can you take off? Here's the load. Typical thing." So we had to open the manuals, and we're like looking and doing the charts and this chart. And then I look over, and they are all done. All the rest of them. I'm like, dang, these are some pretty smart guys, man. They figured out this number, and we haven't even figured out what we're doing yet, which chart to go to. So after about 40 minutes, of course, we're all right, what's the answer? And I'm like, all right, we think we can take off with 3,500 pounds of fuel. And so, yeah, that's about right, 36, 35, that works. He goes, how about you guys? And they all go, full fuel. And he goes, full fuel? How'd you figure that out? Oh, senor, we do it all the time. Instructor says, well, what would happen if you lost an engine? And the one guy sat up and he looked and he said, "Senor, if we thought we were going to lose an engine, we just would not go." At which point he closed the book, said, "I guess we're done here."
That pretty much sums it up, huh?
Walked out the door.
That's awesome.
So, exactly. There's the definition of professionalism and not, right?
So that reminds me of when I flew out of LAX. We had a lot of the foreign airliners coming in and out. I can't remember who it was, but they gave a foreign carrier a crossing restriction, and then you could hear the controller kind of query him like, "Hey, are you going to make that restriction?" Like obviously they're not going to make it. And the guy comes back on the radio and he goes, "Sometimes we make it, sometimes we don't."
That's right.
So
That's right.
anyways, all right. Well, Dave, we certainly appreciate your time, you joining us. We always love to hear your feedback.
Thank you.
You've been posting a lot of good stuff on LinkedIn. So if it's okay with you, we'll put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes so folks can follow along.
Yeah.
Last thing, Dave, I thought we should mention NBAA base is coming up, and we've got the Small Operators Symposium going on that Monday. You and I are both going to be participating in it. Can you just tell our listeners real quick a little bit about it and who it's targeted at?
Yeah, it is strictly targeted towards, or definitely targeted to managers of or pilots of small operations, 2 airplanes or less, that are looking for resources and information and to connect with other guys and gals that are in that field. And we've got some lineup of good speakers. We have a representative from the NTSB who's going to be one of the board members who's going to be there. So the last hour, we're going to be talking and looking at some accident stuff. And I'm sure the conversations about small flight department safety is going to be big, but we have a budgeting, that's always a big question, guys. I always joke, pre-COVID, I'd get a call and a guy goes, "I got hired as a co-pilot 6 months ago, and I'm now the director because the chief pilot left, and I have no idea what I'm doing." So we're trying to build resources to help managers run their small flight departments efficiently, safely, and effectively. So come and hang out, and I think you'll get good information and meet some others and have a good time.
Good stuff.
Well said. All
Thanks,
right,
Dave.
Thanks so much.
Talk to you soon.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks, guys.
Well, I appreciate Dave taking the time to write an email in and call us out a little bit and add a little bit to the conversation. And so it's always great to have those folks that, listen to the show and really think about what we're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always good to know somebody's watching, just like our buddies on social media, right?
Them flaps, they ain't 20s, they 10s, but we keep them clean, though.
Do you get what he's saying? Do you even understand the reference? I don't even think.
Do you?
I think I do, because he's saying they ain't 20s, they 10s, but I think he's referring to like wheel, like rim size. I think I've heard people say like, "Oh, I don't have 20s, they're 15s, but I keep them clean. They're nice wheels. They're just not that so big." I think that's what he.
Them flaps, they ain't 20s, they 10s, but we keep them clean, though.
I don't know.
That's it. We got to send him a direct message.
I know.
Sir, we really enjoy your videos. Now, could you translate
Please,
something for us?
please.
We're trying to understand
Please
how
clean that
your
up a little
flaps
bit.
10, but you're keeping it
Are
clean.
you clean? How are you cleaning the flaps?
Is it physically clean, or are you aerodynamically making?
Are you aerodynamically clean, or are they?
What kind of clean? If you wouldn't mind, thank you very much.
Yeah. I'm sure he'll be real excited to have a conversation with us. Oh my gosh, I love it.
The engine is in the green like foliage. I get that one.
Oh, is that what he was saying?
Foliage.
I see. I didn't get that one. Okay, this is good.
I saw it. Between the two of us, we might get through this.
We're going to get through this. This is great. All right. Well, Donovan Batiste, go check that out. If you're feeling down today, go and watch some of his videos.
You need a laugh.
It is
That is going to be
incredible.
my new go-to.
Well, you've done it again. You've wasted another perfectly good hour listening to Max and I and our friends. We certainly appreciate it. Thank you for the support. Thanks for the emails and reviews, donations, and thanks to our sponsors, Harvey Watt, Advanced Aircrew Academy. You can check out more information about them on our website or in the show notes. I think we're going to do another show here in a couple of weeks. I'm excited about the next show. We haven't recorded it yet, so we can't say what it is. Never tease an interview if you haven't recorded. That's rule 1 in podcasting, but
Is that right?
I think Fingers crossed. Yeah. Yep.
Great. Learning stuff every day.
That's right. All right. Well, that's going to do it. Until next time, remember.
Flexibility. It's the key to air power.
All right.
See you next time.
See you next time.
We doing it, baby.
We're doing it.
Pull that thing back. Let it do what it do, baby. We up, baby.
Ground guard.
The statements made in this show are our own opinions and do not reflect, nor were they under any direction from any of our employers.